They called him the night farmer, not to his face, behind his back, at the co-op, at the diner, at the grain elevator where farmers waited in line during harvest and talked about each other the way farmers have always talked about each other, with a mix of curiosity, judgment, and the specific kind of attention that people pay to anyone who does things differently. Alvin Teske farmed at night. Not exclusively. He did his planting during the day, like everyone else. He did his repairs during the day. He went to church on Sunday mornings and the co-op board meetings on Tuesday evenings and the cattle auction in Lexington every other Thursday. But his field work, the cultivation, the irrigation management, the scouting, the soil work he did after dark, after 9 p.m., usually until 3 or 4 inches the morning, sometimes until dawn. He'd been doing this since 1994, 28 years, every growing season, May through September. While the rest of Dawson County, Nebraska slept, Alvin Teske was in his fields with a headlamp and a soil probe, doing things that nobody could see and nobody understood. Alvin was 62 years old. He farmed 520 acres of irrigated corn and soybeans on sandy loam above the Platte River. He was quiet, thin, and had the deep tan of a man who spent half his life under the sun and the other half under the stars. His eyes had a permanent squint from years of reading soil and sky in poor light, and his hands had a steadiness that came from threading wrenches onto pivot fittings in the dark, by feel, when the nearest light was a quarter-mile away and the nearest help was asleep. His wife, Lena, was used to it. She'd married him in 1986, 8 years before he started farming at night, and she'd learned to sleep alone 5 months a year, the way military wives learn to sleep alone during deployments, with resignation, not resentment. She'd set the alarm clock on Alvin's side of the bed for 9:30 p.m. every night from May to September. She'd have his thermos filled with coffee, strong, black, 2 scoops of instant per cup, because Alvin said real coffee took too long, and a sandwich in the refrigerator wrapped in wax paper with his name written on it, as if someone else might take it. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. and find his boots by the door, mud from last night's walk still wet on the soles, and she'd know he'd come in around 3 or 4, and was asleep in the recliner in the living room because he didn't want to wake her by coming to bed. 28 years of that. 28 Mays through Septembers. Lena had calculated once that Alvin had spent roughly 12,000 hours working in his fields at night. That was more than 500 full days. A year and a half of his life, spent in the dark, in a cornfield, with a headlamp. The neighbors thought Alvin was eccentric. The word they actually used, at the co-op and at the diner and at the grain elevator, was various versions of odd, strange, touched, and when they were being generous, independent-minded, the equipment dealer thought he was cheap. Alvin's tractor didn't have cab lights rated for night work, so he'd mounted 4 $40 LED floodlights from the auto parts store on the ROPS frame with hose clamps. The lights threw harsh white beams across the field like searchlights, visible from the county road, and more than one sheriff's deputy had pulled down the field road at midnight to check on what they assumed was a burglary or a meth lab or some other criminal enterprise that required industrial lighting in the middle of a cornfield. It was just Alvin, checking nozzles, reading his soil probe, talking to his corn in the way that all farmers talk to their crops, not with words, exactly, but with attention, which is the same thing. Nobody asked Alvin why he farmed at night. They assumed they knew. He's just odd. Some farmers are just odd. Old Alvin, out there in the dark, talking to his corn, probably crazy, definitely stubborn, harmless enough. Alvin never corrected them. He never explained. He never gave a speech at the co-op meeting or wrote a letter to the farm magazine or posted a video on the internet. He just farmed. At night. For 28 years. Then the drought of 2022 happened. It was the worst drought in Nebraska since 2012. maybe since 1988. The Platte River dropped to levels not seen since the Dust Bowl. Groundwater levels in the Ogallala Aquifer fell 3 feet in a single year. The Natural Resources District imposed mandatory irrigation restrictions. 11 inches per acre per season, down from the normal allocation of 14. 11 inches to grow corn that needed 22. The math was brutal, and everyone knew it. Every farmer in the county was going to lose yield. The question was, how much? The optimists said 20%. The pessimists said 40%. The realists said somewhere in between and prayed for rain. The rain didn't come. By July, the corn was stressed. Leaves curling at noon. Tassels emerging early. A stress response. The plant trying to reproduce before it died. The fields looked tired, gray-green instead of the deep emerald that healthy corn shows in July. Every field except Alvin's. Alvin's corn was green. Not just green, dark green. Deep, healthy, unconcerned green. The kind of green that made you think someone had painted it. The stalks were tall. The leaves were flat. The tassels were emerging on schedule. Not early. Not stressed. Just doing what corn does when it has enough water. The neighbors noticed. You can't hide 520 acres of green corn in a county where everything else is dying. How the hell is Alvin's corn green? That was the question of the summer. It was asked at the co-op, at the diner, at the grain elevator, at the bar, at the church, and in 40 pickup trucks parked along the road next to Alvin's fields, where farmers had stopped to stare. He's cheating. That was the first theory. He's running his pivots at night when nobody can see, exceeding his allocation, hoping the NRD doesn't catch him. The NRD checked. They inspected Alvin's flow meters. They reviewed his water use records. They flew a drone over his fields to check for unauthorized irrigation. Alvin was under his allocation. Not at 11 inches. At 9.5 inches. He was using less water than he was allowed to use, less water than anyone else in the county, and his corn looked better than anything within 50 miles. It didn't make sense. Unless you understood what Alvin had been doing at night for 28 years. Let me explain, because this is the part that changes everything. Alvin had figured out something in 1994 that the Agricultural Research Establishment didn't formally document until 2015. Plants lose water through their leaves. It's called transpiration. During the day, when the air is hot and dry and the sun is intense, a single corn plant can lose a gallon of water through its leaves in 8 hours. Most of that water isn't being used for growth. It's being used for cooling the plant equivalent of sweating. At night, transpiration drops by 90%. The stomata close. The air is cooler. The humidity is higher. The plant stops sweating. This means that water applied to the soil at night stays in the root zone dramatically longer than water applied during the day. The same inch of water, applied at 2 a.m. instead of 2 p.m., is available to the plant for roughly twice as long because it isn't being immediately pulled out through the leaves and evaporated into the hot afternoon air. Alvin figured this out in 1994 by accident. He'd been running his pivots during the day, like everyone else, and his water bills were crushing him. Sandy loam soil over the Ogallala, the water went through it like a sieve. He was applying 16 inches per season and barely keeping up. The frustration was constant. He'd run the pivot in the morning, walk the field at noon, and the soil would already be drying. By 3 p.m., the top 4 inches would be dry as powder. By evening, the corn would be showing signs of stress, the slight curl at the leaf edges, the grayish tinge that means the plant is closing its stomata and shutting down photosynthesis to conserve water. He'd irrigate again the next day and the cycle would repeat, pour water on, watch it disappear, pour more on, watch it disappear. It was like filling a bathtub with no plug, the water went somewhere. but it wasn't staying where the corn needed it. One night in July of 1994, he couldn't sleep. The heat was oppressive 98 degrees at sunset, still 87 at midnight, and the air conditioner in the bedroom was losing the battle. He lay in bed and listened to its strain, and thought about the $4,200 electric bill he'd gotten last month, mostly from running the pivots, and he thought about the $8 per acre water assessment from the NRD, and he thought about the corn that was drinking water like a drunk at an open bar and never getting enough. He got up. He put on his boots. He drove to the field. The field at midnight was a different place. The heat was still there, but softer. The air felt different, heavier, more humid, like the atmosphere had relaxed and let go of some of the moisture it had been hoarding during the day. The corn rustled in a light breeze that hadn't existed at sunset. He stuck his soil probe into the ground and pulled a core. The soil was moist at 6 inches. That was the water he'd applied at 10 a.m. that morning 14 hours ago. It was still there. At noon, he'd checked the same spot, and it was starting to dry. At 3 p.m., it would have been gone, but at midnight it was still there. By morning, he knew it would start disappearing again. The sun would come up. The temperature would climb. The corn would start transpiring, pulling water from the soil through its roots, up through the stalk, out through the leaves, and into the atmosphere. By noon, the soil would be dry again. Where does the water go? He asked himself. 12 hours ago, I put 0.6 inches on this field, and in 12 hours it'll be gone. The answer came to him not as a thought but as a sensation, the feeling of the cool air on his face, the sound of the corn leaves relaxed and still instead of curled and rattling, the smell of moist earth that he hadn't smelled during the day in weeks. The water goes into the air. The corn pumps it out through its leaves, and it pumps harder when the air is hot and dry. He started measuring. Soil moisture at midnight, soil moisture at 6 a.m., soil moisture at noon, soil moisture at 6 p.m., soil moisture at midnight again. He did this for 3 weeks, writing the numbers in a spiral notebook that he kept in the glove box of his truck. The data was clear. Water applied in the afternoon was gone by midnight. Water applied at midnight was still in the root zone at noon. 6 extra hours. The same water, staying 6 hours longer in the soil, simply because the air above it was cool and humid, instead of hot and dry. The physics was simple. During the day, the vapor pressure deficit, the difference between the amount of moisture in the air and the maximum amount the air can hold, is high. The air is hungry for water. It pulls moisture from every surface: the soil, the leaves, the irrigation spray itself. Some of the water from a daytime irrigation pass evaporates before it even hits the ground. At night, the vapor pressure deficit drops to near zero. The air is saturated. It doesn't want more water. The irrigation spray lands on cool soil, soaks in without competition, and stays put because nothing is pulling it back out. Alvin didn't know the term vapor pressure deficit. He didn't need to. He knew the soil was wet at midnight and dry at noon, and that was enough. Alvin started irrigating at night. He reprogrammed his pivots to run from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. and shut off during the day. His neighbors thought he was crazy. Why would you irrigate at night when you can't see if the nozzles are working? He checked the nozzles every night. That's why he was in the fields at 2 a.m., walking his pivot lines with a headlamp, checking for clogged nozzles, leaking gaskets, stuck sprinklers, doing at midnight what everyone else did at noon. But the water savings were just the beginning. Alvin also cultivated at night. He ran his cultivator between the rows at 11 p.m. and midnight, when the soil was cool and the weeds were at their most vulnerable. Weeds that were cultivated during the day had time to reroot before the evening dew. The disturbance exposed their roots, but the afternoon sun dried the soil before they could desiccate. Weeds cultivated at night lay on cool, moist soil all night, and by the time the sun hit them in the morning, they were too far gone to recover. Alvin used 30% less herbicide than the county average. He also scouted at night. He walked his fields with a headlamp and a notebook, checking for insects, disease, and nutrient deficiencies. Some problems, rootworm damage, spider mite colonies, early-stage fungal infections, were actually easier to spot at night with a focused light than in the broad, diffused light of day. The headlamp created shadows that revealed leaf damage and discoloration that sunlight washed out. 28 years of night farming had given Alvin a 520-acre operation that used less water, less herbicide, less insecticide, and produced more corn per acre than any comparable farm in the county. And nobody knew. Because nobody was watching. Because it happened at night. Iftar 50. Iftar intending. The drought of 2022 changed that. In October, when the harvest results came in, Alvin's corn yielded 198 bushels per acre. The county average was 124. 198 bushels per acre, on 9.5 inches of water, in the worst drought in 34 years. The NRD held a special meeting. The Extension Service requested a farm visit. The University of Nebraska sent a soil scientist, a crop physiologist, and a graduate student with a thermal imaging camera. Alvin showed them everything. He didn't hold back. He didn't make them wait or wonder or beg. He showed them 28 years of notebooks, soil moisture data, irrigation schedules, weed pressure records, yield maps, all recorded by hand in the steady handwriting of a man who had spent 10,000 hours in the dark learning things that the daylight couldn't teach. The soil scientist took samples. The organic matter in Alvin's fields was 4.8%, nearly double the county average. 28 years of cover crops, planted at night, of course, reduced tillage, and improved water management had built a soil that held moisture like a sponge. The crop physiologist measured root depth. Alvin's corn roots extended to 6 feet. The county average was 3 feet. The combination of deep, organic-rich soil and nighttime irrigation that kept the top layer consistently moist had encouraged the roots to go deep, deep enough to access subsoil moisture that surface-irrigated corn never reached. The graduate student's thermal images showed something remarkable. At 2 a.m., Alvin's fields were 8 degrees cooler than neighboring fields. The cooler soil temperature reduced evaporation, reduced plant stress, and created a microclimate that was essentially self-reinforcing. The more you irrigated at night, the cooler the soil stayed. The less water you needed, the cooler the soil stayed. The university published a paper in 2023. Nighttime Irrigation and Field Management. 2.8. Year data from a single-farm case study in central Nebraska. It documented what Alvin had figured out in 1994 by sticking a soil probe in the ground at midnight because he couldn't sleep. The paper was cited 47 times in its first year. Agricultural Extension Services in 4 states updated their irrigation recommendations to include nighttime application windows. Alvin didn't read the paper. He was in his field. At 2 a.m., checking nozzles. Lena bought a copy and put it on the kitchen table next to Alvin's coffee mug. He looked at it the next morning, read the abstract, and said, "Took them long enough." Alvin is 64 now. He still farms at night. His son, Martin, has started joining him, learning the headlamp work, the soil probe technique, the way the corn sounds different at night, when the leaves are relaxed, and the stalks creak in the cool air like old bones settling. The neighbors don't call him the night farmer anymore. They call him Alvin. Some of them have started irrigating at night too. Not all of them. Change comes slowly in farm country, even when the evidence is standing 520 acres wide and 198 bushels deep. But it comes. Alvin's headlamp is a $22 model from the hardware store. He's worn out 14 of them in 28 years. The current one has a crack in the housing from when he dropped it climbing off the tractor last month. It still works. The light is still bright. And at 2 a.m., in a cornfield in Dawson County, Nebraska, it is the only light for miles. The corn doesn't care what time it is. The water doesn't care what time it is. The soil doesn't care what time it is. But Alvin knows that the difference between 124 bushels and 198 bushels is not the seed, not the fertilizer, not the equipment. It's the darkness, and the willingness to work in it while everyone else sleeps.